The darkness of space held many terrors, but none were as feared as the HFY. They were the nightmare that haunted every civilized world in the Outer Rim territories. For 3,000 years, their name had been whispered in fear across countless star systems. Standing 9 feet tall, the HFY looked like death itself had taken physical form. Their bodies were covered in black, razor-sharp armor that grew from their skin like the shell of some monstrous insect. 4 arms extended from their torso, each ending in claws that could slice through steel as easily as paper. Their faces were hidden behind skull-like masks that never showed emotion, never revealed mercy. They were perfect predators. They had evolved on a world where only the strongest survived, and they had brought that same philosophy to the stars. Every species they encountered became either their slaves or their food. There was no third option. Commander Zekthul stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devourer of Worlds. The massive bioship was alive, grown rather than built. Its walls pulsed like a heartbeat, and its weapons were organic cannons that fired concentrated death. The ship itself was a weapon, a living creature bred for war and conquest. Around him, his bridge crew moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had never known defeat. They had conquered over 100 worlds. They had enslaved 50 different species. They had never met an enemy they could not break through fear alone. Today, they were approaching a new target. The third planet of a small yellow star that the locals called Sol. Intelligence reports indicated a species called humans lived there. The reports were encouraging. These humans were weak, soft-skinned creatures with no natural weapons. They had no armor, no claws, no fangs. They were barely capable of traveling between the planets in their own system. Zekthul looked at the tactical display showing the approaching blue and green world. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. That was often the case with worlds inhabited by prey species. They never expected the storm that was coming for them. "Status report," Zekthul commanded, his voice a low growl that resonated through his mask. "All ships report ready for assault, Commander," replied his second-in-command, Vextal. "The prey world shows minimal defensive capabilities. Their technology is primitive. This should be over quickly." Zekthul nodded. It was always the same. Every species reacted to their approach in the same way. First came the attempts at communication, usually pleading messages begging for mercy. Then came the futile resistance, small ships trying desperately to slow their advance. Finally came the screams of terror as the reality of their situation became clear. The HFY had perfected this process. They would broadcast recordings of their previous conquests to the defending species. The sounds of other worlds falling, other civilizations screaming in terror, other proud species being reduced to cowering slaves. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Why fight when you already know you will lose? On the distant blue world, another story was beginning to unfold. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Valiant, watching the alien fleet approach on his tactical screen. The ships were unlike anything in human military doctrine. They looked organic, almost alive, moving through space with a fluid grace that mechanical vessels could never achieve. Morrison was a career military officer who had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. Not this exact moment, of course. Nobody had expected first contact to come in the form of an invasion fleet. But he had prepared for war, and that preparation was about to be tested. The alien ships had been broadcasting for the past 6 hours. The messages were not attempts at communication. They were recordings of destruction, videos of worlds burning, cities falling, people screaming. The aliens wanted Earth to know what was coming. Most species would have been terrified by such broadcasts. Most militaries would have been demoralized before the first shot was fired. But Jake Morrison was not most officers, and humanity was not most species. He looked around his bridge crew. They were young, most of them. They had trained for this their entire careers, but none of them had ever faced real combat. By all rights, they should have been terrified. The enemy fleet outnumbered them 10-1. The alien ships were larger, more advanced, and apparently living creatures that could repair themselves. Instead, Morrison saw something in their eyes that he recognized. It was the same look he had seen in Marines before a difficult assault, in pilots before a dangerous mission, in soldiers who knew they were walking into hell but were looking forward to the challenge. Lieutenant Amy Parker, his tactical officer, looked up from her console. "Captain, we're receiving another broadcast from the alien fleet. Put it on speakers," Morrison ordered. The bridge filled with sounds that would have broken the spirit of most civilizations. The screams of dying worlds, the crack of breaking cities, the final pleas of conquered peoples. It was a symphony of terror designed to crush the will to resist. Morrison listened to it all, his expression never changing. When it finished, he looked around his bridge crew again. They were still calm, still focused. If anything, they looked more determined than before. "Well," Morrison said quietly, "that was certainly educational." One of his junior officers, Ensign Ben Carter, actually smiled. "Sir, do they think that's supposed to scare us?" Morrison found himself fighting back a chuckle. These aliens clearly did not understand humans very well. They had just shown Earth's defenders exactly what kind of enemy they were facing, and instead of fear, it had sparked something else entirely. The truth was, humanity had been preparing for this moment longer than any other species in the galaxy. Not consciously, perhaps, but every human carried within them the genetic memory of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. They were the descendants of creatures who had faced down predators far more dangerous than themselves, and had not just survived but thrived. Earth was a death world by galactic standards. Most planets that supported life were gentle places where evolution proceeded slowly and peacefully. Earth was different. Earth was violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. It had ice ages that lasted millions of years, volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun, asteroid impacts that wiped out entire species. Humanity had evolved not just to survive on such a world, but to enjoy the challenge it presented. They had turned survival into an art form, competition into entertainment, and danger into recreation. They were the only species in the galaxy that engaged in activities purely because they were dangerous. The alien broadcasts had shown them recordings of species that had never faced real danger, civilizations that had evolved in safety and comfort. When faced with true predators, they had no idea how to respond except with fear and surrender. Humans were different. They had been both predator and prey for so long that they had developed something unique in the galaxy: the ability to find humor in mortal danger. As the alien fleet moved closer to Earth's defensive perimeter, Morrison opened a channel to all human ships in the system. His voice was calm, steady, and carried just a hint of anticipation. "All stations, this is Captain Morrison. The enemy has been kind enough to show us exactly what they're capable of. Now it's time to show them what we're capable of. Remember, this is what we trained for. This is why we're here." He paused, looking out at the approaching alien fleet. Somewhere out there, alien commanders were expecting to hear screams of terror. They were expecting pleas for mercy. They were expecting humanity to break under the weight of their reputation. Instead, they were about to hear something that would echo across the galaxy and change everything. They were about to hear the sound of human laughter in the face of death. "All ships," Morrison continued, his voice carrying across the void of space, "prepare for battle, and remember, we've been waiting our whole lives for a fight like this." As the alien fleet closed the final distance to Earth's defensive line, Jake Morrison allowed himself a small smile. The predators of the galaxy were about to learn that they had never encountered anything like humanity before. They were about to discover that some prey bite back. The first shots of the battle lit up the darkness of space like deadly fireworks. The Kethvar fleet moved forward in their traditional formation, a pattern that had brought them victory across 1,000 worlds. Their bioships pulsed with organic energy as living cannons prepared to fire concentrated beams of destruction. Commander Zekthul watched from his command throne as his fleet advanced toward the human defensive line. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The humans had arranged their ships in what appeared to be a standard defensive formation. Their vessels were smaller than Kethvar bioships, clearly built from metal and technology rather than grown from living tissue. The human ships looked fragile to Zekthol's experienced eye. Their hulls were smooth and geometric, lacking the natural armor that had evolved on his own vessels over centuries of warfare. These creatures had built machines to fight with, not living weapons that could adapt and heal during battle. "Begin the assault," Zekthul commanded. His voice carried across the fleet through bio-neural links that connected all Kethvar ships. It was time to add another species to their long list of conquests. The Devourer of Worlds fired first. A massive beam of concentrated energy lanced out toward the nearest human ship, a vessel that registered on their sensors as the UES Defiant. The beam was powerful enough to crack a planet's crust. It should have vaporized the human ship instantly. Instead, something unexpected happened. The human ship rolled at the last second, letting the energy beam pass harmlessly by its hull. The movement was so sudden and precise that it seemed almost like the ship was dancing. More importantly, it seemed deliberate, as if the humans had anticipated the exact timing of the attack. Lieutenant Amy Parker sat at her tactical station aboard the Valiant, coordinating the human fleet's response from Luna Base. The tactical center was buzzing with activity as dozens of officers tracked the alien advance. What struck her most was the mood in the room. Instead of the grim determination she had expected, there was an atmosphere of focused excitement. "Alien fleet is moving into range," reported Ensign Lisa Hayes from the sensor station. "All ships are maintaining formation. They're following standard attack pattern 7, just like the simulations predicted." Amy nodded and opened a channel to all human ships. "All vessels. Enemy is proceeding as expected. Execute Plan Charlie. Remember, stay loose and keep them guessing." The human fleet began to move, but not in any pattern the Kethvar had ever seen before. Instead of maintaining rigid formation, the human ships started spreading out in seemingly random directions. Some moved up, some moved down, others rolled sideways. To the aliens, it looked like complete chaos, but it was not chaos. It was something far more dangerous. It was improvisation. Captain Ben Carter commanded the UES Defiant, the ship that had just dodged the massive energy beam. He was a veteran pilot who had spent years flying dangerous missions in Earth's asteroid belt. Dodging space debris at high speed had taught him that sometimes the best defense was unpredictability. "Nice shot," he said over the open comm channel, speaking directly to the alien fleet. "But you're going to have to do better than that." The Kethvar bridge crew heard the transmission and exchanged looks of confusion. In 3,000 years of conquest, no prey species had ever taunted them during battle. Fear made creatures predictable. This casual mockery was something entirely new. Carter's ship accelerated directly toward the alien formation. To any observer, it looked like a suicide run. The Defiant was outnumbered and outgunned. A direct assault should have been certain death, but Carter was not planning a conventional attack. As his ship approached the alien line, he suddenly cut all power and let momentum carry him forward. The Defiant went dark, becoming nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. By the time the Kethvar realized what was happening, Carter's ship was already past their defensive fire. The Defiant reappeared right in the middle of the alien formation, all weapons blazing. Human missiles and energy beams struck 3 bioships simultaneously. The weapons were less powerful than Kethvar technology, but they hit weak points that had been identified during hours of careful observation. More importantly, Carter was laughing. His laughter echoed across all communication frequencies as his ship danced between the massive alien vessels, too small and too fast for their weapons to track effectively. "Come on, you ugly monsters," Carter shouted over the comm. "I thought you were supposed to be scary." The sound of human laughter in the middle of a life-or-death battle sent ripples of confusion through the Kethvar fleet. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. Prey ran, or fought desperately, or begged for mercy. Prey did not laugh. Zekthul felt something he had never experienced before. It was not fear exactly. The Kethvar did not understand fear as other species did, but it was uncertainty, doubt about the expected course of events. These humans were not reacting the way they should. "All ships converge on the single human vessel," Zekthul ordered. "Destroy it immediately." 6 bioships turned their weapons toward the Defiant. The concentrated firepower should have been enough to vaporize a small moon. But as they prepared to fire, something else unexpected happened. The rest of the human fleet attacked. While the HFY had been focused on Carter's ship, the other human vessels had been moving into position. They struck from 6 different directions simultaneously, their weapons targeting the bioship's sensory organs and weapon ports. The attacks were carefully coordinated, but that was not what disturbed Zekthul. What disturbed him was the sound coming over the communication channels. More humans were laughing. They were enjoying this. Dr. Lisa Hayes monitored alien communications from her research station on Mars. As a xenolinguist, she had been studying the HFY language since their fleet first appeared in the outer system. What she discovered was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. The HFY language had thousands of words for different types of fear, pain, and submission. They had elaborate terminology for describing the hierarchy of predator and prey. But they had no word that corresponded to the human concept of fun or enjoyment. They literally could not understand why humans would find pleasure in danger. As the battle raged, Lisa listened to the alien communications with growing amazement. The HFY commanders were trying to analyze human behavior using concepts that simply did not apply. They kept expecting the humans to break, to show fear, to behave like every other species they had conquered. Instead, the humans were treating the battle like some kind of game. Captain Jake Morrison watched the tactical display from the bridge of the Valiant. The battle was going better than anyone had dared hope. The human fleet was smaller and less powerful than the alien force, but they were more flexible, more creative, and completely unpredictable. Most importantly, they were learning. Every exchange of fire taught the humans something new about their enemies. The HFY bioships were powerful, but they followed predictable patterns. They were evolved creatures, which meant they had instincts that could be anticipated and exploited. The human ships, on the other hand, were controlled by minds that had evolved to be adaptable. Every human pilot was making decisions based on split-second observations, changing tactics as the situation developed. "Captain," Amy Parker reported from her station, "the aliens are starting to change their formation. They're pulling back from close engagement." Morrison smiled. The HFY were learning too, but they were learning something that no predator wants to discover. They were learning that their prey might be more dangerous than they were. "All ships," Morrison announced over the fleet communication system. "Good work so far. But this is just the beginning. Stay sharp, stay flexible, and remember what we're fighting for." He paused, watching as another human ship executed a maneuver that would have been impossible for a living bioship to duplicate. The pilot was clearly enjoying himself, pulling off stunts that were part combat tactic and part aerial acrobatics. "And remember," Morrison added, "we've been waiting our whole lives for opponents this interesting." Across the HFY fleet, alien commanders listened to the human communications with growing unease. The sounds they heard were not the desperate cries of creatures fighting for survival. They were the excited shouts of hunters who had found worthy prey. For the first time in their long history of conquest, the HFY began to wonder if they were the ones being hunted. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and Commander Zekthul was experiencing something completely new in his long military career. For the first time in 3,000 years of HFY conquest, he was not winning easily. The human fleet was smaller than his force. Their weapons were weaker. Their ships were fragile constructs of metal and circuits instead of the living bioships that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. By every measure of military power, the HFY should have won this battle in the first hour. Instead, the humans kept fighting. Worse than that, they kept adapting. Every time the HFY developed a new tactic, the humans would counter it within minutes. When the bioships tried to surround human vessels, the humans would scatter and regroup somewhere else. When the HFY used their superior firepower to force a direct confrontation, the humans would disappear into the asteroid belt and launch surprise attacks from unexpected directions. Most disturbing of all, they never stopped making those sounds. The laughter, the jokes, the casual conversation that treated a life-or-death battle like some kind of entertainment. Zekthul listened to another intercepted human transmission. A pilot named Sam Johnson was describing his narrow escape from 3 Kethvar ships as if it had been a thrilling ride at an amusement park. The human actually seemed disappointed that the chase had ended so quickly. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. On the research station orbiting Mars, Dr. Lisa Hayes made a discovery that would change everything. She had been analyzing Kethvar communications for hours, trying to understand their tactical responses. What she found was more important than any military intelligence. The Kethvar were starting to make mistakes. For a species that had conquered the galaxy through perfect tactical execution, the aliens were showing signs of confusion and uncertainty. Their formation changes were becoming less coordinated. Their response times were getting slower. Most significantly, their communications were filled with concepts that had never appeared in their language before. Lisa recorded a transmission and played it back, running it through her translation software. The Kethvar commander was asking his subordinates a question that roughly translated to, "Why do they find pain amusing?" The question revealed the core of the problem. The Kethvar had built their entire civilization around the concept of fear. They understood terror, pain, submission, and dominance. These were the building blocks of their society and their military strategy. But humans were responding with emotions that simply did not exist in Kethvar psychology. The aliens could not understand why creatures would find enjoyment in danger, satisfaction in struggle, or humor in mortal peril. Lisa opened a communication channel to the fleet command. "Captain Morrison, I'm sending you my analysis of alien communications. I think I know why we're winning." Captain Jake Morrison received the data on the bridge of the Valiant. As he read through Lisa's findings, he began to understand the bigger picture. The humans were not just winning battles. They were winning a psychological war that the Kethvar did not even know they were fighting. "All ships," Morrison announced over the fleet communication system, "I want you to listen carefully. The enemy is more confused than they are angry. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep them guessing. Most importantly, keep enjoying yourselves." The response from the human fleet was immediate. Laughter echoed across the communication channels as pilots acknowledged the order. To the monitoring Kethvar, it sounded like the humans had just received wonderful news instead of instructions for continued battle. Captain Ben Carter was pursuing a damaged Kethvar bioship through the outer system. His own vessel, the Defiant, had taken significant damage. The hull was breached in 3 places, life support was running on backup power, and his weapons were operating at 60% capacity. He was having the time of his life. "Come on, you overgrown bug," Carter said over the open channel, addressing the fleeing alien ship. "I thought you monsters were supposed to be tough." The bioship turned and fired, its organic weapons sending streams of energy toward the Defiant. Carter rolled his ship, letting the beams pass harmlessly by, and returned fire with his remaining missiles. The Kethvar ship shuddered under the impact. Its living hull began to regenerate, closing the wounds that human weapons had inflicted. But the regeneration was slower than before. The creature was tired, confused, and most importantly, afraid. Carter could hear the alien communications. Even through the translation software, the panic in the Kethvar pilot's voice was clear. The alien was calling for reinforcements, reporting that the human was behaving in ways that violated all known patterns of prey behavior. "Hey, buddy," Carter said cheerfully. "You want to know what the difference is between us and all those other species you conquered?" The alien ship fired again, missing by an even wider margin. Its pilot was losing focus, making mistakes that would have been unthinkable at the start of the battle. "The difference is," Carter continued, "they were fighting to survive. We're fighting because it's fun." The word "fun" did not translate properly into the Kethvar language. The alien pilot heard it as a concept that had no meaning, a sound that conveyed no information. But the emotion behind it was clear enough. The human was enjoying this encounter. For a species that had evolved to use fear as their primary weapon, facing an enemy that could not be frightened was like trying to cut water with a sword. Nothing they did produced the expected result. Lieutenant Amy Parker coordinated the human response from Luna Base. The tactical center had become a hub of controlled chaos as officers tracked dozens of simultaneous engagements across the solar system. What amazed her was how quickly the human forces were learning to work together. Each ship was operating independently, making decisions based on local conditions. But somehow they were all working toward the same goal. It was like watching a jazz band improvise. No one was following a script, but everyone was playing the same song. The Kethvar, by contrast, were creatures of hierarchy and rigid command structure. They excelled at executing predetermined plans, but they struggled to adapt when those plans failed to work. "Parker to all stations," Amy announced. "Enemy formation is beginning to fracture. They're losing cohesion. Recommend we press." The advantage. The human fleet responded immediately. Ships that had been engaged in individual duels began to coordinate their attacks. Vessels that had been hiding in the asteroid belt emerged to strike at damaged alien ships. The entire human force shifted from defensive tactics to aggressive pursuit. The Kethvar found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Instead of a desperate last stand by a dying species, they were facing a coordinated offensive by creatures who seemed to get stronger as the battle continued. Commander Zekthal watched his tactical display with growing disbelief. His fleet was not just failing to advance, it was actually being pushed back. The humans were winning. "All ships," he commanded, "implement terror protocol. Broadcast the fear recordings at maximum power." The Kethvar fleet began transmitting the sounds that had broken the will of countless species. The screams of dying worlds, the cries of conquered peoples, the final moments of civilizations that had dared to resist. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal, designed to crush the spirit of any enemy. The human response was immediate. But it was not fear. It was laughter. Across the human fleet, pilots listened to the alien broadcasts and responded with amusement rather than terror. Some made jokes about the poor audio quality. Others critiqued the dramatic presentation. A few even started taking bets on which recording was supposed to be the most frightening. The sound of human laughter, broadcast on all frequencies in response to their most terrible weapons, sent a wave of something like panic through the Kethvar fleet. These creatures were not just unafraid. They were mocking the very concept of fear itself. For the first time in their species' history, the Kethvar began to retreat. Not tactically, not strategically, but emotionally. They were facing an enemy that operated outside all their understanding of how the universe worked. As the alien fleet began to pull back from the inner system, Captain Morrison opened a channel to all human ships. His voice carried a note of satisfaction that would have been impossible at the start of the battle. "All stations, this is Morrison. Outstanding work, everyone. The enemy is withdrawing to regroup. Use this time to repair damage and resupply. But remember, this is just the beginning. We've shown them that we're not easy prey. Now we need to show them what happens when humans decide to hunt." The cheers that echoed across the human fleet were heard by every Kethvar ship in the system. For creatures who had spent millennia as the galaxy's apex predators, the sound was more terrifying than any weapon could have been. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. The turning point came 18 hours into the battle, when Captain Sam Johnson found himself in a situation that would have terrified any sane military officer. His squadron of 6 ships was completely surrounded by Kethvar biovessels, outnumbered 3-1, with no hope of reinforcement and no clear escape route. Johnson looked at his tactical display and started laughing. "Well, boys," he said over the squadron communication channel, "looks like we're in a bit of trouble here." His wingman, Lieutenant Mike Davis, checked his own sensors and whistled. "That's one way to put it, Captain. 18 enemy ships versus our 6. I'd say the odds are definitely not in our favor." "Not in our favor?" Johnson replied, his laughter growing louder. "Mike, these are the best odds we've had all day. Usually we're outnumbered 5-1. The Kethvar ships began closing in, their organic weapons charging for what should have been the final assault. The bioships moved with the confidence of predators who had cornered their prey. This was a familiar situation for them. 6 small vessels trapped with nowhere to run. It should have been over in minutes. But Captain Johnson was not thinking about escape. He was thinking about Jupiter's moon Io, which was approximately 2 million kilometers away and getting closer as the gas giant continued its orbit. "All ships," Johnson announced. "I've got an idea. Follow my lead, and whatever happens, keep laughing. These monsters hate the sound. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations to come, though no sane tactical instructor would ever recommend it as a viable strategy. Johnson ordered his squadron into a tight formation and accelerated directly toward Io. Not toward the safety of empty space, not toward the hope of reinforcement, but toward one of the most dangerous objects in the solar system. Io was a volcanic moon caught in Jupiter's massive gravitational field. Its surface was constantly erupting, spewing radiation and charged particles into space. The moon's thin atmosphere was poisonous, and its magnetic field could scramble electronics from thousands of kilometers away. It was the last place any rational pilot would choose to fly a damaged spacecraft. The HFY ships followed, confident that they had the humans trapped. The bioships were larger and more powerful. They could easily catch the fleeing human vessels before they reached whatever dubious safety the moon might offer. But Johnson was not fleeing to safety. He was fleeing to danger. And danger, for humans, was just another word for opportunity. All ships prepare for atmospheric entry, Johnson announced as his squadron dove toward Io's surface. Captain, Mike Davis said, his voice tight with concentration, our ships weren't designed for this kind of stress. The radiation alone could kill our electronics. I know, Johnson replied cheerfully. Isn't it exciting? The human ships skimmed Io's surface at a speed that should have torn them apart. The volcanic moon's gravity field grabbed them, pulling them into a trajectory that no computer could have calculated. The ships began to shake as their hulls were stressed beyond design limits. Behind them, the HFY bioships followed, but their pursuit was becoming more cautious. The organic vessels were not comfortable in this environment. The radiation was interfering with their living systems, and the unpredictable gravity was making their pilots nervous. Johnson's ship, the Fearless, was the first to start breaking apart. Warning lights flashed across his control panel as hull plates began to separate. The life support system was failing, the weapons were offline, and the navigation computer had given up trying to plot a course through the chaotic gravitational field. Johnson could not have been happier. Hey Mike, he said over the communication channel. Remember that time you said military life was boring? Yeah, Davis replied, fighting to keep his own disintegrating ship under control. I take it back. The HFY ships were falling behind, unable or unwilling to match the humans' reckless dive toward the moon's surface. The bioships were suffering from radiation exposure, their living hulls blistering and their organic systems shutting down in self-defense. But the human ships were suffering too. One by one, they began to come apart under the stress. Metal plates scattered into space, engines failed, and life support systems collapsed. The difference was that the humans were enjoying every minute of it. As the Fearless finally broke apart completely, Johnson ejected in an escape pod that was never designed to survive in Io's radiation field. His last transmission before the communication system failed was the sound of his laughter, echoing across all frequencies. Colonel Matt Brooks monitored the situation from his command ship in the asteroid belt. He watched the tactical display as Johnson's squadron disintegrated around Io, taking 6 HFY bioships with them in the chaos. It was a Pyrrhic victory at best, trading 6 human ships for 6 alien vessels, but the strategic impact was far greater than the tactical loss. For the first time in their 3,000-year history of conquest, HFY ships were retreating, not regrouping, not repositioning, but actually fleeing from a battle zone. The sight of the galaxy's most feared predators running from a species they had expected to easily dominate sent shockwaves through both fleets. All ships, Brooks announced over the fleet communication system. Did everyone just see what I saw? The response was immediate. Cheers, laughter, and excited chatter filled the communication channels as human pilots realized what had just happened. They had made the HFY afraid. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Engineer Kate Sullivan had been monitoring the debris field around Io, tracking the scattered remains of both human and alien ships. What she discovered changed everything. Command, this is Sullivan, she reported from her salvage vessel. I'm reading life signs in some of the HFY bioship wreckage. Their ships are still alive even after taking that much damage. Understood, Brooks replied. Maintain safe distance and continue monitoring. Actually, sir, Sullivan said, I'd like permission to board one of the damaged vessels. If these ships are still alive, we might be able to learn something about their technology. There was a moment of stunned silence on the communication channel. The idea of voluntarily boarding an enemy vessel was dangerous enough. The idea of boarding a living enemy vessel that might still be capable of defending itself was beyond reckless. Permission granted, Brooks said finally. But Sullivan, if that thing so much as twitches, you get out of there immediately. Understood, sir, Sullivan replied. Then, after a brief pause, she added, This is going to be fun. Sullivan's boarding of the damaged Kethvar bioship became the stuff of legend. The engineer spent 3 hours inside the alien vessel, studying its living systems while the creature struggled to repair itself. She recorded everything, from the way the organic walls pulsed with circulation fluids to the manner in which damaged sections began to regenerate. Most importantly, she was laughing the entire time. The sound of human laughter echoing through the sacred corridors of a Kethvar war vessel was more than the alien crew could comprehend. To them, their bioships were not just tools of war, but living extensions of their own bodies. Having an enemy treat such a vessel as an object of curiosity rather than fear was a violation of everything they believed about the natural order. The psychological impact rippled through the Kethvar fleet faster than any communication could travel. Word spread that humans were not just fighting their ships but boarding them, studying them, and laughing at them. Commander Zekthul received the reports with growing disbelief. These humans were not behaving like any prey species in recorded history. They were not trying to escape or hide. They were not begging for mercy or offering tribute. Instead, they were treating the entire conflict like some kind of game. They were taking risks that no rational creature would consider, making sacrifices that served no strategic purpose, and finding entertainment in situations that should have been terrifying. Most disturbing of all, they were winning. The Kethvar fleet began a general withdrawal from the inner solar system. It was not a tactical retreat or a strategic repositioning. It was the first time in their species' history that they had been forced to flee from creatures they had intended to conquer. As the alien ships pulled back toward the outer system, human laughter followed them across the void of space. The sound carried on every communication frequency, echoing through the darkness like a promise of what was to come. The galaxy's apex predators had just learned that there was something more dangerous than being feared. They had learned what it felt like to be laughed at, and somehow that was infinitely more terrifying than any weapon they had ever faced. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy was a very different place. News of humanity's victory had spread across the stars faster than any ship could travel. The story grew with each telling, becoming legend before it could become history. The neutral trading world of Centauri Prime. Ambassador Ryan Clark sat in a crowded cantina telling the story for the 100th time. Around him, creatures from dozens of different worlds listened with fascination as he described the moment when human laughter had echoed through the corridors of a Kethvar bioship. The audience was mixed. There were traders from the peaceful Zellan systems, miners from the asteroid belts of Rigel, and even a few former slaves who had escaped from Kethvar territory. All of them had one thing in common. They had lived their entire lives in fear of the galaxy's apex predators. So there we were, Ryan said, his voice carrying easily through the room. Surrounded by ships the size of small moons, outnumbered 10-1. And what does Captain Johnson do? He starts laughing. The crowd leaned forward. They had heard this part before, but they never got tired of it. Not nervous laughter, Ryan continued. Not the laugh of someone who has lost his mind, but genuine amusement, like he had just heard the funniest joke in the universe. A Zellan trader raised one of his forearms. But why? Why would your people find humor in such a situation? Ryan smiled. It was a question he had been asked many times, and he still did not have a perfect answer. Because that's what humans do, he said simply. We find joy in the struggle itself. The harder the challenge, the more alive we feel. The Kethvar thought they were showing us our doom. Instead, they were showing us the best game we had ever played. The word game did not translate well into most galactic languages. Many species had concepts of play, but few understood the human idea of turning survival into entertainment. An old Rigel miner spoke up from the back of the room. "Is it true what they say about the boarding action? Did one of your engineers really laugh while studying a living Kethvar ship?" "Kate Sullivan." Ryan nodded. 3 hours inside a damaged bioship, recording everything while the creature tried to heal itself around her. The whole time she was commenting on the fascinating biological engineering like she was taking a guided tour. The crowd murmured in amazement. The idea of voluntarily entering a Kethvar vessel was difficult enough to comprehend. The idea of finding it interesting rather than terrifying was beyond their understanding. But the story was spreading. With each telling, the legend of human fearlessness grew. More importantly, it was inspiring other species to reconsider their relationship with their former oppressors. The first uprising had begun on Kepler 7, a mining world that had been under Kethvar control for 50 years. The local population had heard the stories from Sewell and decided to test whether their masters were truly as invincible as they claimed. The rebellion started small. A few missed shipments, some damaged equipment, workers who were slow to respond to orders. But when the Kethvar sent enforcers to restore discipline, something unexpected happened. The miners laughed at them. It was not the trained, tactical laughter of human warriors. It was the nervous, hopeful laughter of people who were discovering that their nightmares might not be real after all. The Kethvar enforcers, already shaken by reports from the Sol system, found themselves facing something they had never encountered. Resistance that was not based on desperation or anger, but on something approaching amusement. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Within weeks, 3 more worlds had declared independence. Within months, the entire Outer Rim was in chaos as dozens of species that had been enslaved for generations suddenly remembered what freedom felt like. Commander Zekthul had been exiled from the Kethvar fleet after the unprecedented defeat at Sol. He now lived on a remote trading station, forgotten by his own people and avoided by most others, but he had become something of a historian, documenting the collapse of the empire he had once served. He spent his days in the station's archives, recording interviews with refugees from former Kethvar territories. The stories they told painted a picture of an empire in free fall. "It started with the laughter," explained a former slave from the Vega colonies. "We heard recordings of humans laughing at Kethvar ships and something just broke inside us. If these soft-skinned creatures could mock our masters, maybe we could too." Another refugee, a trader who had escaped from Kethvar territory, described the psychological impact. The fear was gone. Once you realized that the Kethvar could be laughed at, they stopped being monsters and became just another species with really bad attitudes. Zekthul listened to these accounts with growing fascination. As a military strategist, he understood what had happened. The Kethvar had built their entire civilization on psychological warfare. They conquered through fear, controlled through terror, and maintained order through the threat of violence. But humans had broken that system by refusing to be afraid. More than that, they had turned fear into entertainment, terror into amusement, and mortal danger into a game worth playing. The psychological virus had spread from Sol to every corner of the galaxy. Species that had been slaves for generations were suddenly remembering that their masters were not gods, just bullies with superior technology. Dr. Lisa Hayes published her research on the Kethvar language 6 months after the battle. Her findings were groundbreaking. The alien language had thousands of words for different types of fear and submission, but no concepts for the emotions that humans took for granted. They had no word for courage, no term for defiance, and no understanding of humor in the face of danger. Their entire worldview was built on the assumption that all intelligent life would respond to threats with fear and submission. The Kethvar were not evil, Lisa wrote in her famous paper. They were simply limited by their own psychology. They could not imagine a species that would find joy in struggle, amusement in danger or satisfaction in seemingly impossible challenges. Her work explained why the human victory had been so devastating to Kethvar morale. It was not just a military defeat. It was proof that their fundamental understanding of the universe was wrong. Captain Jake Morrison returned to Earth as a hero, but he found the attention uncomfortable. He preferred to focus on the practical lessons learned from the conflict. The Kethvar were powerful, he said in an interview with Galactic Broadcasting. Their ships were superior to ours in almost every way, but they had one critical weakness. They could not adapt to unexpected situations. Morrison had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy. His calm demeanor during the crisis and his tactical innovations were studied by military academies on dozens of worlds. But what made him famous was something simpler. He was the human who had first laughed at the galaxy's most feared predators and lived to tell about it. People ask me if I was afraid, Morrison said. Of course I was afraid. Fear is a useful emotion that keeps you alert and focused. But fear was just one emotion among many. I was also excited, curious, and yes, amused. The Kethvar showed us recordings of their past victories, expecting us to despair. Instead, we saw them as instruction manuals for what not to do. The interview was broadcast across known space, subtitled in hundreds of languages. The image of Morrison calmly explaining human psychology while alien translators struggled with concepts like recreational danger became iconic. Captain Ben Carter survived his ejection near Io and was rescued 3 days later by a human salvage crew. His first words upon being brought aboard were, "Did we win?" When told that the Kethvar were in full retreat, Carter laughed so hard that the medical team was concerned about his mental state. But his laughter was not hysteria. It was pure satisfaction. "Best fight I ever had," he said later. "I hope we run into them again someday. Maybe next time they'll bring more ships." The quote became famous throughout human space and was eventually translated into dozens of galactic languages. Most species found it incomprehensible. A few found it terrifying. The Kethvar found it devastating. A year after the Battle of Sol, their empire had collapsed completely. Hundreds of worlds had declared independence. Dozens of species that had been enslaved for generations were building their own fleets and governments. Most importantly, the galaxy had learned a new truth. The sound of laughter was more powerful than any weapon, more contagious than any virus, and more dangerous to tyrants than any army. Commander Zekthul finished his historical account with a simple observation that would be quoted for centuries to come. "We thought we were the apex predators of the galaxy," he wrote. "We were wrong. We were merely bullies who had never met anyone willing to fight back. The humans taught us that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who fears you, but the one who finds you amusing." The sound of human laughter still echoed across the stars, a reminder that somewhere in the galaxy lived a species that had turned survival into an art form, and that, more than any fleet or weapon, made them truly fearsome.